On this Thursday night, choosing a permanent home for Canada's nuclear waste. Where it will go, the reaction.
This is, from my perspective, a historic moment.
Plus the economic impact and safety concerns. Russia bombards Ukraine with almost 200 missiles. The 1 million people now in the dark, and the signs of turmoil within the Kremlin. Canada Post's labor dispute deepens. What the company is doing that the union says is illegal. Plus, how will your letters get to Santa?
Dear Santa, make my wish come true.
Don't worry, why the strike is not a nightmare before Christmas.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After decades of trying to find a permanent place for Canada's radioactive nuclear waste, a site has finally been chosen. The plan is to bury spent fuel from nuclear reactors deep underground in Northwestern Ontario. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization has announced the multi-billion-dollar project will be built near Ignace, Ontario, northwest of Thunder Bay. There has been intense research and negotiation to get to this stage, and there's more work to do. Having nuclear waste in your backyard is not an easy sell. Eric Sorensen has our top story on why the site was chosen and the reaction.
The problem is this: massive tanks temporarily storing more than 3 million fuel bundles, the most radioactive nuclear waste in the country. And now a solution in a remote part of northern Ontario. After 20 years of consultations, researching the igneous rock deep underground, and developing plans to transport it safely, Canada's nuclear waste will get a permanent home.
This is, from my perspective, a historic moment for Canada. We're moving it to a location in a safe way that will contain the materials for the very long term.
Two areas were in the final running. In South Bruce, the Saugeen Ojibway Nation had not yet agreed. So from there, the focus became the site in northern Ontario between Ignace and the Wabigoon Lake Ojibway Nation, which surveyed its members and agreed to proceed, stating, "We have a sacred duty to protect the land." Wabigoon Lake's yes vote reflects the nation's commitment to thoroughly explore the project's feasibility through a rigorous regulatory process. And the township of Ignace is also on board.
It's a celebration. It's a celebration for our community.
The mayor says there will be economic benefits and jobs that will come from a $26 billion project, and the community concluded it can be done safely.
Every person in this community had a chance to have their voices heard and came back with a 77% affirmative to move forward.
For decades, millions of radioactive uranium pellets have gone into fuel bundles to produce energy for Canadians. Now up to 6 million bundles will be encased in thick copper-covered tubes and placed in impermeable clay containers. From facilities on the surface, the waste will be taken down at least half a kilometer deep to a repository 2 kilometers by 3 kilometers in size. Deep underground, up to 125,000 clay containers will be moved by robots into placement rooms holding those copper tubes. The boxes will be stacked up and sealed off, hopefully forever. The radioactivity left to decay for hundreds of thousands of years. Not everyone is convinced it's safe.
We're concerned about transport truck accidents and train derailments that will contaminate either the large bodies of water or contaminate people's properties. Transportation decisions and the regulatory process will take years. If approved, construction will start in the 2030s, and storing nuclear waste in northern Ontario will begin in the 2040s. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
How to deal with the incoming Trump administration in the U.S. is going to be a challenge for every premier in Canada. And they emerged from an emergency meeting with the Prime Minister last night, agreed that it is wise to take a unified approach. Every part of the country would be hit if Trump makes good on his threat to impose punitive 25% tariffs on everything Canada sells to the U.S. Mackenzie Gray on how most premiers seem willing to set partisanship aside.
A change of tune from Canada's largest province.
Positive conversation. We look forward to tightening up the border. All the premiers agree, the Prime Minister agrees, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Doug Ford, not the only premier going from sour to satisfied with the feds after Justin Trudeau and the premiers met Wednesday night.
Sécuriser les frontières.
François Legault, who has fought Ottawa for years over the Quebec-U.S. border, now says they finally seem to be getting the message.
We believe that there is a circumstance where we can make additional investments to reassure Canadians that all of the measures necessary are in place.
But it's not just reassuring Canadians, but also the incoming president.
We are going to start by all putting America first.
And a part of that agenda, Donald Trump threatening a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods, unless in his eyes, Canada reduces the number of drugs and illegal migrants that cross into the U.S. Ottawa's newfound unity with some provinces isn't extending to Alberta, with Danielle Smith saying she's considering sending provincial resources to the Alberta-Montana border.
I think if we address that, then we'll be able to get on to talking about the trade issues.
Smith, who labeled Trump's concerns as valid, backed by the federal Conservatives.
Because Trudeau has so thoroughly broken the border, we're getting a patchwork of premiers who have no choice but to try and hold the border together.
Despite that claim, Pierre Poilievre wouldn't say if he'd support giving the RCMP more money. Just one sign compared to Trump's first term of a less united Canadian political front, with opposition parties now willing to attack a politically vulnerable prime minister.
There's a lot of blood in the water, politically speaking, and there's also very, very little upside for them to stay in lockstep this time.
Smith and Trudeau did agree on one strategy to try and stop the tariffs, Donna, with the PM telling the premiers to work any contacts they have in the U.S.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. Legislation to make the promised GST holiday a reality is expected to pass in the House of Commons tonight. The Liberals tabled the bill yesterday. GST will be removed from dozens of items, from prepared foods to children's toys and some alcohol. The NDP will support it. The Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois are expected to vote against it. The GST will be removed from a list of items starting December 14th and lasting until February 15th. Well, they've been on strike for nearly 2 weeks, and now some Canada Post workers are being laid off. The Crown Corporation says the layoffs are temporary. It says because of the strike, it's had to adjust its operations. Talks to resolve the strike are at an impasse, and the union calls this a scare tactic. Neetu Garcha on the postal strike that's got no end in sight.
Members are rallying at the Canada Post head office in Ottawa as their union says some striking postal workers are being laid off.
We have what we have here today because workers like us stood in picket lines in the past.
And the union claims some of those layoffs may be more permanent.
If the layoffs were a prelude to dismissal, then the law prohibits that. The union is right.
In a statement, Canada Post confirmed the layoffs are temporary, adding the business has been significantly impacted. We have taken steps to adjust our operations, a move it says is allowed under the Canada Labour Code, citing the expired collective agreement. Some labour experts say the temporary layoffs are surprising.
This is unusual. I can't recall this happening before. I see that as a pressure tactic. I don't think it's unethical. I mean, they've been bargaining and not moving, so something has to give.
The dispute hit a standstill on Wednesday.
We want fair wages, we want good benefits.
The Crown Corporation says it can't fully meet the union's wage and weekend delivery demands, while the union accuses the company of pushing part-time gig-style work. The impasse leaving Canadians waiting for essential mail, with no end in sight to the disruption. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Parts of this country are in for some rough weather in the coming days, from frigid temperatures out west to an intense storm set to hit areas of central and eastern Canada. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell is watching what looks like an icy end to November. Anthony.
Donna, from Newfoundland to BC, a lot of winter weather in the days ahead. It's starting off as rain for the Maritimes, but a quick transition tonight in New Brunswick, 15 to 20 centimeters of snow by morning, and then it starts to melt. The big upper low is still up over Hudson Bay, and this is the steering currents basically across much of the country. Counterclockwise flow around low pressure, and that means all that Arctic air. A high of minus 23 tomorrow in Saskatoon. Well, that cold is going to move over all 5 of the Great Lakes, which are actually at record warm levels for this time of year. So lake effect snow, squalls, there are all sorts of warnings in place, and rightfully so. Amounts by the end of Saturday already up over 60 centimeters north of Toronto. We could have a meter of snow by Monday in some of the hardest hit communities north of the Greater Toronto Area.
Okay, Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell, thank you. Well, no one wants it to rain on a parade, but that same weather system hit the annual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City today. This is the 98th year of the parade, famous for its big balloons. It was pouring rain, but about 3 million people still lined the streets, standing in puddles to join the festivities. The spectacle featured 22 big balloons, 34 floats, many marching bands, and of course, Santa Claus himself. People in Ukraine are facing another winter of bitter cold, and tonight more than 1 million are without power. Russia attacked the country's energy infrastructure, the second aerial bombardment on the power grid in less than 2 weeks. Nathaniel Dove reports on Russia's strategy to try and freeze Ukrainians into submission.
This is the aftermath of Russia's heaviest attack in weeks. Nearly 200 missiles and drones fired at Ukraine. This woman says she heard one, then 5 other explosions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accusing Russia of using cluster bombs that indiscriminately release explosives and are especially damaging. The attacks leaving more than 1 million people without power, and Ukraine with less than half its generating capacity as frozen temperatures set in across the country. Russia's President Vladimir Putin again threatening to use the Kremlin's new mid-range ballistic missile.
It claims that it turns everything to dust to the level of the atom is pretty patently false, but it is certainly true that this is a potent weapon.
Putin's strategy seems clear: to break the will of the sheltering and suffering.
He keeps hanging on to this idea that somehow the Ukrainian population will rise up against its government and demand capitulation because they just want to move on. It hasn't happened.
But in Russia, signs the strain of war are starting to show.
It's important to keep in mind that a lot of this is fear-mongering and bluffing on Russia's part.
This incident now with the ruble tanking, I think portends more trouble, more turmoil for the Putin regime because they cannot have guns and butter.
The winter, Ukrainians' third under siege, will be cold and dark. Experts say the war remains a battle of attrition, of who can hold out the longest. Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
There's hope the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah will lead to one between Israel and Hamas. Coming up, why analysts say there are major obstacles. Plus, top dog, why veto has made history at a prestigious competition. That ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is holding, but it's fragile. Israel fired on a Hezbollah facility it claims was violating the terms of the agreement, which is less than 48 hours old. Hezbollah, in turn, accused Israel of violating the ceasefire. For now, the focus is shifting back to Gaza, where a ceasefire seems a long way off, and Palestinians are desperate for the fighting to stop. Mike Armstrong reports.
Gazans have heard the news about the ceasefire in one conflict, but the fighting in theirs continues. Israeli military strikes on Gaza Thursday, according to medics on the ground, killed at least 17 people. If there has been good news for Lebanon, there is none in Gaza. I hope a ceasefire will happen like it did in Lebanon, this woman says. I want to live in safety. Now, the deal in Lebanon, some analysts say, may make a deal in Gaza less likely. The hard-right members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, who wanted to keep pressure on Hezbollah, may now push even harder to go after Hamas. There is, however, some pressure from the other side. Families of the hostages are calling on the government to focus now on a deal in Gaza, the hope being some good news leads to more.
We've seen that a ceasefire is possible. There was a ceasefire in the north. It's time for a ceasefire in the south.
People of Gaza have been through hell.
U.S. President Joe Biden has said he hopes there's now new momentum for another push at peace in Gaza. Thursday, the Turkish president said Biden's new initiative is late in coming, but important nonetheless. He says there will be no regional or global peace until there's a fair and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the deal in the north is a win for Israel in that it decouples that conflict from the one in Gaza. Hezbollah had said it was fighting for Palestinians and wouldn't stop until that conflict was over. It now has. Instead of giving Gazans hope, many feel they're more isolated than ever.
I think it has had an impact, significant impact on Palestinians feeling like they have been left by the international community, left alone.
Now, the biggest issue may be that the obstacles that have prevented a deal for more than a year are still there. Hamas wants a permanent end to the fighting and a pullout of Israeli troops. Israel's said it's not leaving and that its goal is to destroy Hamas. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Australia's parliament has passed some of the world's toughest legislation on big tech. The aim is to stop children under the age of 16 from using social media because of the harm it's doing to their mental health. The ban will force platforms to take reasonable steps to ensure age verification is in place or face fines of up to 50 million Australian dollars. Trials on how to enforce the ban will begin in January before it becomes law next year. No small potatoes ahead what Donald Trump's tariff threat could mean for some of Atlantic Canada's biggest industries. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's threat of a 25% tariff on all Canadian products sold to the U.S. is far too big to ignore. In Atlantic Canada, farming and fishing are crucial to the economy. Heidi Petracek has been talking to people about what they fear as one of the East Coast's most lucrative seasons gets underway.
At Tangier Lobster, sending these crustaceans to customers in 21 countries is big business, and the livelihoods of more than 20 employees depends on it. So President-elect Donald Trump's threat to slap tough tariffs on Canadian exports isn't taken lightly.
One of my former customers told me this morning that he couldn't afford to buy a Canadian lobster should these tariffs kick in.
But the company's managing director believes it is just bluster from a politician appealing to his base.
This is a bluff. This is a negotiating posture.
Talk or not, the industry is taking it seriously. Canada's Lobster Council working to protect an industry worth more than $3 billion.
We have a very strong position with America. They need us, we need them.
It's not just lobster that would be on the line, but other seafoods as well, like snow crab. And then there's softwood lumber that goes from the Maritimes into the U.S., along with agricultural products like PEI potatoes.
A tariff of that magnitude would be devastating.
Prince Edward Island may be small, but its potato industry is the biggest in Canada, worth more than $1.3 billion to the island and employing more than 5,000 people.
It would result in higher prices and, really higher prices back to the consumer in those areas where PEI potatoes are going.
The Prime Minister taking a Team Canada approach to the potential fight, weighing the risks of retaliation, while some experts advocate the high road.
No one wins trade wars or tariff wars. You can hope that the administrators of the two countries can talk peacefully and as matured people and solve the problem without entering into a war.
This particular tank you're looking at here holds about 45,000 pounds.
Back in Tangier, this lobster exporter has a message for the incoming U.S. president.
This would be an initiative that not only wouldn't bring down the cost of living, it would increase the cost of living for your own citizens significantly.
A cost he hopes will make Trump think twice. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Tangier, Nova Scotia.
Next, how your letter can still get to Santa, even though Canada Post is on strike. For many families, the holiday season is not complete until the letter to Santa is written and sent. Because of the strike at Canada Post, there won't be any deliveries to the North Pole for the moment, but fear not, as Heather Yorks-West explains, there is a backup plan to make sure Santa gets his mail.
To Santa, I want a goat. Don't ask why. Be aware that we have solar panels. Don't land your sleigh on them. It's the kind of critical information the North Pole needs. Fortunately, with Canada Post on strike, Little Evelyn's Community Library has stepped in to help.
We decided that we would step up as a team and help Santa out. So we are collecting Santa letters at our library and making sure that every letter gets answered.
For the last 4 decades, Canada Post has helped deliver Santa's letters, handling 1.4 million last year. This year, letter carriers are on the picket lines, though for some, the call to help Santa Claus remains strong.
We still have our connections to the North Pole, and so we are collecting on the picket line at some of the depots and some of the picket lines.
In Maple Ridge, BC and Winnipeg, letters will be delivered to Santa by striking postal workers, though Santa's response may need a hand from mom or dad. Elsewhere, Santas have enlisted local help. In Nova Scotia, it's at a market.
The elf comes during the weekend, and then the following Monday, when you drop it off, it'll be back here waiting for you with maybe some candy or other things like that.
Elise, on the nice list.
And of course, Santa's gone digital as well.
Santa gets just over 1 million every year through emailsanta.com, although of course this year expect to be quite a bit more than that.
Emailsanta.com was launched in 1997 during another Canada Post workers' strike. Santa realizing then kids' letters were just too important. There's just so much to ask for.
A car. I want a cat. Hockey stick, maybe, yeah. Lots of notebooks and a scooter.
Heather Urix, West Global News, Calgary.
That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Well, he's not Canadian, but we're going to end tonight's newscast with Vito, just because he's so cute.
Goes to the pug.
Oh, the pug, David. How about that, huh?
Vito the Pug won Best in Show at the National Dog Show in Philadelphia. The first time a pug has been top dog in that competition. The judges declared Vito is everything a pug should be. Lots of dog in a small package. Thanks for watching. Jeff Stemple will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.